Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. We are just waiting the last minute or so before we begin our first webinar in this InTech Open Journals webinar series around open science. So last minute for people to join. Welcome to all of you still joining. I can see the numbers going up on my other screen, and we will be starting very shortly. Those joining, please note we will be recording the webinar and it will be available online if you want to go back and access anything after the presentation is finished. Okay, I think we're just about there. So I am going to begin because we have a very busy agenda and we have 45 minutes. So yet again, welcome everyone to this first webinar in our series of InTech Open Journals Open Science webinars in 2023. We are delighted to start with a webinar on preprints. We will be following this up on a webinar in June on open data and a webinar later in the year on open peer review. We have 3 great speakers and we have 45 minutes. So we have an awful lot to get through in that time. But as I mentioned, we are going to host the webinar recording afterwards, and the slides will be available as well. So it might seem like the slides are moving past you quite quickly, but don't worry, you will be able to go back and access that information. I am going to be keeping an eye on time, and I will be jumping in at times to move our speakers forward so we have enough time for Q&A at the end. Just a quick moment about me. I've been in publishing for over 20 years and was an academic by training and have been involved in open access for about 15 years now. So it's a delight to be here and to be introducing this webinar series to you. As mentioned before, this is all about open science. And before we begin, I'm just going to remind us all of what open science is and what it means and what it can do. It's all about creating that environment where our knowledge that we create through our research is shared in a fair, accessible, easily findable, reusable manner, and the content and the information is disseminated and read by as many people as possible around the globe to progress scientific advancement as quickly as we possibly can to help solve some of those big problems that we see facing us in terms of sustainability, climate change, AI, and so on. And open science has a key part to play in that. As I'm going to skip that one in the interest of time. As most of you will be aware, InTech launched 3 new journals last year, which embrace those open science initiatives and aims from their very launch moment, which means they are openly embracing things such as preprints, which we're talking about today. The 3 journals are listed there, and I encourage you to go and learn more about them if they are of interest to you as potential authors. These journals, because they are embracing open science, really help you as an academic disseminate your work to a wider audience and exchange those ideas with other academics around the globe in a more seamless, straightforward manner. Now, today we're going to be talking about preprints. It's a part of the academic ecosystem that has been there for a long time, but has rapidly increased recently in terms of how much it is used and its importance to the whole research ecosystem. And I'm delighted that we have 3 incredible speakers with us here today. We have Eric Olson, who you can see on screen already, who's our first speaker from the Center for Open Science. And he's going to talk about preprints, where they've come from, how they are developing, what the impact of them is for you as an academic, and how you can embrace open science by using them. We're then going to move to Mark Hahnel from Figshare, who's going to talk about the maximizing of impact by using repositories such as Figshare to try and share your data and your research papers and your blogs and your videos and whatever it is to increase the impact of your work, and also the future of those repositories, what they can go on and be used for. And finally, we will hear from Dr. Thomas Heinbockel, who's going to tell us what it's like as an academic in the real world using preprints and preprint servers and the impact they can have. He's also an editorial board member of one of the new InTech Open journals. I'm going to be keeping an eye on time, and I'm going to stop there so we save as much time as possible. I will stop sharing my screen, which should allow Eric to start sharing his. And over to you, Eric. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And I am going to tell you about a couple of things today about preprints, obviously, give you some history and some overview of that topic, and then also a little bit, continuing where Sarah started there, a little bit into open science as a concept, and where my organization, the Center for Open Science, comes in. There's going to be some teases to some of those upcoming topics that you have in this series, as well as Mark's will too. So thank you for having me, and let me talk to you about preprints today. So let's just start with what is this preprint thing that we're talking about here? And there's not 100% alignment across all of the many research communities between disciplines and regions. They don't quite agree on what a preprint is 100%. But there's pretty good definitions that we can start with here that will get you in the right direction. And then I have a visual that will probably make this even easier. So when we refer to a preprint, what we're typically talking about is a version of a research paper that is posted publicly available in a service or repository that anybody can access with little or no barriers to getting to that literature, and typically prior to that same study material going through peer review and being published in a traditional journal. And then there are some other versions or other papers that are kind of like this that might be posted after peer review. The postprint, which is the same idea. You're posting it somewhere that's freely accessible and findable, of limited barriers to access, but it's posted after the peer review has already been completed on that same paper, on that same material. But this one hasn't been through the copy editing and had all the fancy visuals and all of that the journal might have completed. You're not going to post that one elsewhere, probably. But you can post that material. And both preprints and postprints, a lot of journals do support having these, the paper that you're trying to publish having been posted as a preprint or a postprint version being posted before your journal article is released. Not all of them, so that is something to look at before you commit to this route. But mostly that is supported by journals now. And then finally, this version of record. This is typically not a preprint, but rather the version of your paper that is published in the traditional journal. But sometimes your preprint may be the version of record. If you never did go and publish a traditional version of that paper, that may be your version of record. So should you plan to post a preprint for your next study? Well, there's some good reasons to do that, and some of those reasons, these are not an exhaustive list here, but a few reasons that we'll come back and look at in our discussion on open science too is getting your findings out and into researcher hands, and with limited barriers for those researchers to access it quickly. So instead of having to wait years even to get your journal article edited and published, you can get that for those findings out there quickly, and without any kind of paywalls. It broadens that feedback pool to more than just a handful of peer reviewers. Now you could have lots of reviewers that are in your community and might check those services that you're posting your preprints in. And a lot of the things we hear about the concerns about posting preprints is nobody wants to get scooped and have their work or have those ideas published before they get a chance to finish their study. But really, this is probably a misunderstanding of the sequence of events, because if you post your preprint in a known and responsible repository, then you have a DOI for that preprint. You've staked your claim to that idea. And so if anything, you're protecting yourself from being scooped rather than making yourself vulnerable to it. And you're demonstrating openness and sharing in your research community, and your community may be doing that very effectively already, but certainly doesn't hurt to signal that you and your community are moving forward responsibly in that way. And so this is a look here. This is an example of a preprints and not a postprint here. But at that same time that you're sending a manuscript to a journal and then maybe multiple journals to get reviewed and then possibly published, you take that same manuscript and submit it to a preprint server, which may have a brief screening moderation period, and then is posted publicly in a couple of days, versus months and months and maybe years for that traditional version of record to be published. So if you have really critical findings, and I'll have an example of that here in a couple minutes, that could be that could be a huge difference for other researchers that are trying to build on work like this or use data that you're sharing, that they would otherwise have to go and make their own study that instead of building on what you did. So having that work in those hands of researchers really, really quickly can make a huge, huge difference. And it gives you a way to be cited for that work right away rather than years later. Because you can cite a preprint just as effectively as citing a paper. And just a little history here. And some of this I bet you didn't know, even if you did a little research on preprints ahead of the event today. Sarah alluded to preprints having been around for a long time, but it is a long time. NIH, National Institutes of Health in the US, in 1961 launched a project or a program called the Exchange Groups, which was for sharing papers in biology that we would call preprints now. So pre-publication, they would share those papers amongst each other in this community. And they tried that for a few years, and then the program was closed in 1967. And then it would be a while before we would see something in this arena come back again. And then Archive launched in 1991, and that really started an explosion. Archive is still around and is still extremely visible and successful and has lots and lots of preprints in their area of physics and math. And a few years later, we start seeing ones again that are still around and are still very, very popular. The Social Sciences Research Network and research papers in economics that have the same concept of being able to share papers early within their areas of interest. And then since then, we've seen this here sort of visualizing how many preprints are being shared over the last decade, which is obviously just shooting up. And this number has only gone up since this graph ended in 2018. And then just the number of patients, the number of services that are available to post your preprints based on your discipline or your region or your area of interest. There's a lot of opportunities for that. Little feedback here. I don't think that's on my side. So just an idea of just how many opportunities you have for sharing preprints in your discipline or your institution even may provide a route for that. And just to give you a sense of the connective tissue here between what I'm going to tell you about here in a moment with some open science background and what we were just talking about with preprints. Here at the Center for Open Science, where I am based, We're a nonprofit based in the US, and our mission is to increase openness, integrity, and reproducibility of research. And one of the ways that we facilitate that is building infrastructure that allows you to share and collaborate with your peers and share data and reports and get insights into what the impact of those sharing in your communities and across open research environments. So that's the OSF. And so the OSF is unique in its placement among many other data and research repositories like Figshare that you're going to hear about in a moment, which is a terrific resource. OSF is a little different in that it wants to provide resources and tools for researchers across the entire life cycle of their work. So before they even do their study, they can document all of that, their plans for their research, kind of like a data management plan, but for their entire study, all the way through sharing the outputs of their work. And the OSF is completely free for a user to sign up for. And then we provide services and tools for research institutions and research communities that want to enable sharing within their own services and moderation policies and things like that. So one of those things that the OSF enables is a preprints specific service that wants to enable this latter part of the research lifecycle here, where you're interpreting, writing your findings, and publishing those reports. And so if you've done all this great work and you have data to share and you have findings to share, you don't have to wait until your paper is published to do that. You can actually get those findings out quickly, and you could do all of these things on the OSF or connect them with other repositories like Figshare. You can connect your preprints to those, or your study plans to those as well. And so just to give you an idea of why this is at all important, here at COS, we've run a couple of studies, huge studies that looked at many other studies. So a meta-analysis of many studies in the field of psychology and cancer research. And unfortunately, the findings are that many more than expected of those studies cannot be replicated. So the methods that were reported in the papers couldn't be used to produce the same results. And if they did, it was not nearly the impact that the initial study provided or wrote in their papers. And so the insight there is that there's not enough information about what is happening during the life cycle of that project, like we were talking about with the OSF. Only the paper and what is limited in their methods and data sharing, which then means, for whatever reason, I can't use what they've provided to reproduce what they created originally with their study. So, thinking about one of the sort of eliminating what open science isn't first, because this can get confusing. And there's a lot of terms here. Open science and open access are not the same thing. So open access is great and can help get to published work, same way that preprints can. Sorry about the barking dog in the background. But it is not the sufficient and is not all of what open science encompasses. And we'll talk about those in a minute. And open science is not just for the hard sciences either. It really, despite that term we've kind of locked ourselves into with our name, it actually is not at all. We use now more frequently the terms like open scholarship or open practices, because any discipline can use some of the things that we talk about here, like preprints. That is not something that only the hard sciences will take advantage of. And so what are the things that you can be doing to be practicing open science? It's really, if you had to remember one phrase from this whole event, in my opinion, it's this one: share as much as you can of the life cycle of your research project, and then protect what you can't. So if you have patient identified data, don't share that. That's not good, but share as much as you can. So your data management plans and your data sharing, code and materials, if you pre-registered your analysis plan, so if you wrote all of that down and published it prior to doing your study, and then obviously preprints and any kind of reproduction and replications as well. Share as much of that when you can, as you can, because that will enable reproducibility, and it'll also get you more things that could be cited, increases that. I don't like the word impact because it's loaded in our space, but it can increase the impact of your work, facilitates collaborations, makes your work reproducible so it doesn't fall into one of those studies that can't reproduce your work. And you'll see that there's lots of funder mandates, and I'm not going to talk about each of these, but there's a lot of this happening these days where you're seeing these new mandates coming up. And then we've seen in just the last few years with COVID research that getting results out rapidly was incredibly important during those couple of years. And so preprints use and pre-registration saw a big increase. And we see even some of the preprint services in the news for how quickly they were able to facilitate and moderate research and make those available. And so just to wrap up here, I threw a lot at you about preprints and about open science, but the key here is, as much as you hear from me and from Mark, is you don't have to do all of it in order to do some of it. So the things that you hear in this webinar and even those subsequent ones about being better with your metadata or doing lots of metadata with your outputs, open data, open materials, all the preprints, do what you can as you're comfortable with it, and just start sharing what you can when you can, because that's going to start to add up. And before you know it, you'll really be a top-notch open science practitioner. So with that, we'll hand it over to Mark.
That's great, Eric. Thank you so much. I love that ending point to say share what you can, but don't feel overwhelmed by sharing everything. So brilliant. And we've got some questions coming in, which we'll come to at the end of everyone's presentation. So now over to Mark Hahnel. Thanks very much, Eric.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Eric. My name is Mark Hahnel. I'm the founder and CEO of Figshare, and I am going to be talking for about 10 minutes as a follow-on from Eric's talk about how we are involved in the open science movement, open research movement, and what you can do as a researcher to practice good open practices. So we've been going for about a decade. Figshare is a repository. We have a free version at figshare.com. And if you go back over a decade, you can see the message we had back then was get credit for all of your research. So if you're a researcher, it used to be that you have papers and you have citations, one output and one metric. Now you have lots of outputs and lots of metrics, and we want to make sure that we're covering all of those for you so you can tell the story around your research. So, as I mentioned, it is a repository platform. There is a free version, and we have people sharing data sets. You know, a lot of publishers are saying, if we fund you, you need to make the data sets the files that you're generating with your research available. But we also have people sharing preprints, theses, PowerPoints. If you're keynoting at a conference and you want to share it with a wider audience so you have more impact for your research, you can do it there. And we also build platforms. We have a free version, and we sustain ourselves by building platforms for like-minded research organizations, universities. We also do preprints platforms. We're also working with our hosts today in Tech Open, so be on the lookout for some exciting new things coming from them. Again, very like-minded thinking. Here you can see an example of what a preprint looks like. You've just got the PDF here, but what you can see is we track metrics, views, downloads, citations. I saw some of the comments on the questions already around, can you track this impact? They do get a DOI. You can cite these outputs, and you can track things like altmetric scores on them as well. So we provide these platforms where the one thing that they provide for researchers is this speed over other existing platforms. So authors sign up for an account, they submit an article, somebody checks the preprint and the data to make sure they're okay, but there's no peer review, and that's the important thing. And then you have this one-click publish the preprint, and you get a DOI. So we have things, this is what a platform looks like. You can then sort the platforms via things like impact metrics, citation counts, altmetric scores. I'll come back to them in a little bit as well and tell you a little bit more about the kind of impact that we're seeing. But you can see the thing that they're lacking is this copy editing, making it all look very pretty. They just look like PDFs and Word documents, which is the core story, which is really interesting. We as a platform are constantly working to improve the functionality around this. So on the back end, making sure there's metadata so that your preprints get indexed in Google Scholar, but also that you have full text search across the platform as well, so people can better discover your content. The more open it is, the more discoverable it is, and the more impact your research can have. So this is summed up. This follows on from Eric's work very nicely. I'm going to talk about where do preprints fit into the publishing of papers space, right? And in my mind, my opinion is the ideal publishing platform is fast, it's open, so that people like myself who don't go to an academic institution can read the content. It's trusted, which is vague in what trusted means, but we'll go into that the most. And it's cost effective. How much is it going to cost me? And so there's a few different ones at the moment. The traditional publishing process, I send my paper to Nature and hope it gets published, or many other publishers as well. Is it fast? No. The peer review slows it down. Is it open? Often not. Is it trusted? Yes, it's got that peer review. And is it cost effective? The old version of I don't pay to publish, it's cost effective for me. It's not cost effective for my university who's paying $1 million to access the content. But for me as an author, it is. Gold open access, pay to publish. Is it fast? No, for the same reasons. Is it open? Yes. Is it trusted? Yes. Is it cost effective? No, because it cost me a couple of $1,000s. It's getting more cost effective now, which is really good to see. Green open access, I make a version of my own paper available. It just falls down on the fast. So preprints are a slightly different beast, right? They are fast, they are open, and they are cost effective because they usually don't cost anything. But trusted, there's not that peer review. So we need to be innovating in that space. As Eric mentioned, what they are fantastic for, this fast thing, it takes a while to get peer reviewed. Different publishers are getting better at it. So if you really want to establish priority and say, first, I did that research, I don't care that it's not being peer reviewed yet, I can show you that I published that paper, I did the work, you can do that. You also see now that there's tenure and promotion, ASAP Bio, Google them, they'll tell you all the reasons why you should be publishing preprints, better than I can do in 5 minutes. So examples of schools saying we will promote you and include preprints, faculty hiring saying we will hire you based on your preprints. So there's really a seismic shift happening. And this is kind of mirroring the seismic shift in open access. Researchers, funders want researchers to be publishing open access so that you can have more impact and they get back more people can read the content that they pay for. And this is my lifetime. You can see the green line here is the number of open access papers published, and the blue line is the number of closed open access papers. So for the majority of my life until the last 2 years, there's been more closed access published papers every year than there has been open access. That has changed now, which is fantastic. So now the open is the majority. It is a hockey stick that we will continue to see more and more until it gets very much closer to 100%. And we also see in preprints, not only on this is using a platform called dimensions.ai. You can see it's all kinds of subjects now, and it's all kinds of countries. You have researchers globally publishing preprints. And if you look at the universities they're coming from, this is the top amount of preprints. The university that's publishing the most preprints so far is Harvard. So it's got that prestige element to it. You can see they are getting cited as well, which is great to see because they're a relatively new thing. And so if we go back to this point around, it's almost the perfect system. How can we make it more trusted? We're working on that. We have a sister organization called Repeta, who is looking at trust markers. and saying, can we automatically scan a paper and say, well, this paper is following best practices? You know, we can look at the researcher history, we can look at the organization identification. Do they have ethics statements? Do they have data availability statements, and where are they putting it? Do they have study objectives? And you can start to give these trust markers to papers with an automatic scan. So that's really good to see that we can start doing some automated stuff. Peer review is still going to be about, it's still essential, but we can start addressing the fact that preprints are happening. We want to encourage them because they move everything further, faster, but we also want to do everything we can to ensure that this type of content, it can be more trusted. We're also seeing this is looking at those trust markers over time. So publications, peer-reviewed publications, are increasing with these trust markers over time, and we can see this for different journals. And we also want to see this as well for preprints. So we can track this information and we can move the conversation along. So lots of good reasons why you should be making preprints available. Lots of good reasons why we can help make preprints a good part of the scholarly ecosystem, along with your peer-reviewed publications, which are also essential, and you should be publishing open, just my opinion. And we're also at Figshare looking at ways we can improve this as well. This is some experimentation we did with a publisher called Wolters Kluwer, where you can see you can rate this preprint and say, is it trustworthy? Again, this is an experiment, so we'll see how it does, but you can have the community read and say, this will have impact, this has quality data, or hey, this is not reproducible, this needs more data. So we're trying to move the space along, and I'm happy to leave some time for questions, hopefully at the end, but please do check out the work that InTech Open is doing in this space, and Figshare and Centre for Open Science. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Loads of questions still coming in, which we're going to get to at the end. Dr. Heinbockel, are you able to put your camera on and get ready? Brilliant. Everyone is tech savvy these days. So thanks, Mark. And I'm going to now hand over to our last speaker. We're running to time, so we are going to be able to get to some of your fascinating questions at the end. So over now to Professor Heinbockel. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this timely webinar. I'm on the faculty at Howard University. I've been there for quite a few years, and I've been part of the publication process since I was a graduate student, really, which was, I hate to admit, more than 30 years ago almost. So I've conducted research, analyzed data, written and published manuscripts. And at the beginning of my career, publishing was primarily a waiting game. You would submit a paper, and hopefully you would hear back from the editor a couple of weeks later, or sometimes it was a couple of months later, and then you would make revisions to your manuscript, and then it would be another waiting game. So then around the year 2000, there was a new development when publishing was transitioning away from just having hard copies and actual hard copy journals in your hand to sort of hybrid publishing, where journals would still print hard copies of the journal, but you could read the journal articles online as well. And it was probably around that time when journals started another feature, which they also called preprints at the time, which is different from the preprints that we talk about today, or that I'll talk about in a minute. At the time, journals would give authors the option of publishing online the PDF of their manuscript after the manuscript was accepted by the journal. So I'm a neuroscientist, neurophysiologist, so I published often in the Journal of Neurophysiology. And so they developed this novel feature that they called articles in press, and it was really optional, but these articles then were immediately citable, and they were searchable in Medline or PubMed. And so it was pretty quick turnaround. So articles that were accepted would appear online within a week after they were accepted. And that really meant that the accepted work was available to the community essentially immediately. And then manuscripts, of course, would enter the conventional copy editing and production stream. And that would take then again several months before you actually had a preprint or a reprint, I should say, or you could actually see the journal with your article. And of course, the idea behind that was that, once the copy editing and production phases took on, that would adhere more to the strictures of the English language and the journal format. So as I mentioned, I'm a neuroscientist. More specifically, actually, I work on our chemical senses, specifically our sense of smell, also known as olfaction. And that's why this slide is in here. I couldn't resist the temptation. And so now let's fast forward some 20 years from the year 2000 or around 2000 to early 2020. And what happened in 2020? Well, COVID-19 happened. And you know that one of the first symptoms that anecdotally was mentioned by patients suffering from COVID was the loss of smell. So when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, colleagues of mine and I, researchers, patient advocates around the world, we gathered and started a new research group, the Global Consortium for Chemosensory Research. And so we quickly developed a questionnaire about people's experience with COVID in terms of their ability to smell and taste. And then that questionnaire was sent to literally thousands of people around the world. And then once the data came in, we rushed to get the data analyzed, write it up, and then hopefully publish it. So the data would be informative to colleagues, physicians, and lay people around the world. And so we wanted to publish as soon as possible. So the paper was sent to a preprint server, and Mark and Eric both basically alluded to a number of the things that I'm mentioning here. We actually sent it to a preprint server known as medRxiv. So that's how it's spelled, medRxiv. And we did that mainly for two reasons. One is so the community early on in COVID could learn about our findings and benefit from the experience of patients around the world. And two, to let everyone know what we were doing, that we were doing this work and potentially contribute to it. So I wasn't really familiar with preprint servers, honestly. So I had to learn this a couple of years ago. So medRxiv, that's how it's pronounced, is basically a free online archive and distribution server for complete but unpublished manuscripts. So again, these are unpublished manuscripts. They haven't necessarily been sent to any journal. And they're essentially preliminary reports of work that has not been certified by peer review. That's sort of the big thing. And the preprint server makes a big point of mentioning that these studies, these preprints, should not be relied on to guide clinical practice or health-related behavior. They should not be reported in news media as established information, even though, as we just heard from Mark, the media actually do cite them and do refer to them. So here's another image from the website, and you can actually see here this cautionary note at the bottom that says these are preliminary reports that have not been certified by peer review. Do not rely on those for clinical practice or health-related behavior. But principally, these preprints, they are almost like their own publication, and people can cite them in their CVs. And often they're actually slightly different than the paper that you might publish in a traditional journal. The title might change. You might make some modifications as you analyze the data in more detail and so on. So here's actually a list what medRxiv does in terms of the subject areas. You can see there's pretty much everything. You can't read it, everything from addiction medicine to urology and everything in between. So they publish a whole bunch, or essentially the entire spectrum of the medical sciences. So this, for me, was really a new development. I hadn't really been familiar with this type of publishing. And as was pointed out already, the advantage, of course, is the speed with which this gets published. The disadvantage being that the research has not gone through the usual evaluation cycle before it's released to the public. So I was actually wondering who's actually running medRxiv. Apparently, it's a collaborative project that's run jointly by Cold Spring Harbor Lab, Yale University, and BMJ, which is a global healthcare knowledge provider. And it's a nonprofit service financially supported again by Cold Spring Harbor Labs and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And Cold Spring Harbor actually owns and operates the server. So here's actually our first paper. You can see there's lots of authors, which is sort of another thing. We were able to include a lot of authors, but we actually had so many authors that we had to say, well, this is sort of the GCCR group author, because we had so many people who were part of it. But that was our first publication that came out of this global questionnaire that we put out. And indeed, we were able to get that online very quickly. And so is there a charge for submitting manuscripts to medRxiv? Apparently, there's no fee to submit the manuscripts, which is great. So it's cost-free. Mark alluded to that as well. How long does it take for a preprint to appear? Again, Mark mentioned this initial screening, and then within 2 to 4 days, you get your manuscript on there. If you send it in over a weekend, it might take a little longer. But, that's still pretty quick compared to weeks or months. This was our second paper then. We analyzed the data more. At that time, we also put all our org IDs in front of our name, which is another great service that's available out there. Now, here's something that might be more relevant to the folks in North America, but principally for anyone who's applying for grants. Yes, you can cite your preprints in your NIH grant application. They actually encourage it. They want you to disseminate the data that you collected, because essentially they're paying for it. There's no impact factor, so this is not a journal in the sense that it has an impact factor. My prediction is that at some point this will change as well. So the other thing is, in terms of indexing or public dissemination, if you publish papers, you're always concerned, well, where is it listed? I mean, are my papers listed in PubMed so people can find my work? So medRxiv preprints are actually indexed in a number of search engines or other servers, Google, PubMed cross-references, and European PubMed. So they are quite widely distributed, which is very nice for people who need to get the recognition. This is one, the last paper that we just put out a few weeks ago. Again, we are now using the server more and more. I haven't really done this for most of my research, but for everything that's related to COVID-19, and both Eric and Mark alluded to that, that has become very important to get the data out there, to get the preprints published. And so basically for everything that we did as part of this GCCR, this new collaboration, we put everything on the preprint server medRxiv. So finally, can I actually remove a manuscript that has been posted on medRxiv? And this again brings me back to what was said already. No, you cannot remove it, because you do receive a DOI, a digital object identifier, and that makes it citable and part of the scientific record. And as I mentioned, it's indexed by a number of services, so it can't really be removed. However, principally, you can withdraw your manuscript if you can't stand by your conclusions or acknowledge the fundamentals of the works. Now, I just want to finish by saying I'm very glad that InTech Open is part of this process, of this open science process. And it becomes really an issue, not only of getting things published quickly and putting a stamp on what you're doing, but it is also an issue of inclusiveness and equality, because those researchers or universities that are well funded or have a lot of resources, they are able to access all the journals that require subscription, or you need to pay if you want to see an article. And so subsequently, people who don't have that access they are not on an equal footing as far as their research and research endeavor is concerned. So really, open science must be the way of the future. And again, I'm glad to see that INTEC is part of this movement. Thank you.
That is great, Thomas. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for keeping to time. I really, really appreciate it. Before we move to a couple of questions, I'm just going to try and answer some common themes that have come through on the chat really quickly. As you can all see, preprints are now a living, breathing part of the academic publishing space. They started off primarily in the physical sciences, and they're now being used by academics from across science and social science and humanities. Is a preprint a published peer-reviewed research paper? No, it is not. Can you have a preprint and a paper under review at the same time? Absolutely, you can. A preprint does not replace your peer-reviewed paper or your version of record, but it supports it. It gets your research and your findings out there earlier. It allows other people to see your information before they would post peer review. Is it trusted? They are becoming more trusted, but they are not trusted in the way that a peer-reviewed paper would be. Does that mean to say you shouldn't publish preprints? Absolutely not, because your peers will comment on them and will interact with them. As Mark showed at Figshare, there's now like a peer review process, as you like, starting on preprints. So does that mean preprints will replace journals? Don't know. That's one of the questions, and we'll come to it. And are there any copyright issues around this? No, your copyright as an academic remains with you, depending on the license that is being used at any preprint server. But most of the time, that license remains with you, and there is not a copyright issue, and there will not be an issue for you submitting your work to a journal. And INTEC Open Journals actively support you to do this. They want you to put your original version or your data out there as a preprint, even while you're submitting to the INTEC Open Journals. Right, I'm going to throw a question out to our three speakers, and we'll see who wants to take it. So it was mentioned a couple of times in the Q&A that sort of role of preprints now versus how it's going to evolve into the future. We've kind of touched on it, and how that relationship between preprints and traditional journals is changing, and where we think it's going to end up. Who wants to go first? Everyone's nodding and smiling. Mark has got his hand up, otherwise I'm going to pick someone. Go for it, Mark.
I was just going to say very quickly, I think what we'll move to and what we'll see is that when you think about what a preprint is and what a peer-reviewed publication is, it's just different snapshots at different points in their trajectory from concept to, and I think if academia was invented today, people would just publish their results as they go and snapshot stories around them as they go. But we still have to play within the old system, and we still have to recognize the prestige of peer-reviewed journals within promotion and tenure. To ignore it would be stupid. And so I think in the not too distant future, we will see this. There is a version of when it was submitted, and there is a version that has been peer reviewed. Some will never get to that point. And so maybe there will be this added level of, prestige of only show me preprints that have had a subsequent peer reviewed publication. And if you don't have access to that one, at least you'll have access to the preprint as well.
Thanks, Mark. Go, Eric.
Yeah, I'll just add that, what we talk about now is the traditional model really is not that old in the grand scheme of research sharing traditions. And so something like a preprint, and to Mark's point, being able to share with peers, not the traditional peer review process, but sharing with people that you trust, is very much a traditional method of presenting your work and having them give you feedback that you then integrate and move forward with. And now with identifiers that Mark alluded to, and also Thomas with the those ORCID IDs in there, when you could put identifiers on everything and have them all sync up. And I'll add an extra slide to my presentation that I hid today, but if you do your preprints and you share your data and you publish your paper, you get to do all of it. So you get to have the benefits of every single one of those. You don't have to choose one. So really, we're on a good trajectory in terms of the kind of options you're going to have as a researcher to share your work.
Yeah, if I can add one other point there, I think when we talk about peer review, we are really talking about a pre-review of manuscripts before they get published. And I think Mark sort of pointed to this idea there's going to be more and more post-review. You put your paper out there and let the community decide if that's really valuable research and how it can contribute to the field. Because peer review, I believe in peer review. If everything in life would be as fair and transparent as peer review would probably be good. But at the end of the day, it's two people typically who review a manuscript. They might have their own biases. They might have their own, knowledge gaps and so on. So if you put a manuscript out there and you invite the community and say, look, guys, take a look at it and let me know what you think. And maybe we need to modify it before it's the final product. I think that eventually will really be the way to go. And that can also be that's an open process, open science process. And hopefully it's not going to be costly and rather be essentially free for the entire community.
Love it. I love this idea of a snapshot, free access, everyone being able to maximize the benefit of the research and moving things forward. I'm going to pick one more question before we wrap up. So we're all talking about preprints, how great they are for disseminating work, about sharing information. So why at times is the adoption of them so slow? So if we look at published papers, I think there was a comment in the chat, published papers, very few of them at the moment have an associated preprint with them, even though that's starting to increase. So why is that so slow, and how do we encourage our audience here to embrace preprints and start using them? I'm going to go to Thomas first as our editor on the panel.
Well, I think one of the reasons is that first we are adhering to tradition, meaning that's what we have done always, and that's what we want to do. And I don't know if Mark or Eric mentioned the tenure process. Well, okay, if someone comes before me and says, well, I have a couple of papers, I put them all on preprints, but none of that was really peer reviewed, I would probably be reluctant to say, yeah, that you fulfilled the criteria of publishing several papers and maintaining a research program that, is embraced by the community. So I think that's one of the reasons. The other thing is, you put a preprint out there, and while that really means you sort of put out, okay, this is what we have done, that doesn't really prevent anyone else from going ahead and trying to scoop you with the paper in Nature that comes out 2 or 3 weeks later, and then they say, look, I don't know about your preprint, but we had a Nature paper, so what do you really want? So I think there's that reluctance as well, that people, feel more comfortable to say, here's the quote unquote really published paper as opposed to a preprint. But that's because we are adhering to traditions that we, should throw overboard.
Thanks, Thomas. Anything to add to that from Mark and Eric?
I think Thomas nailed it. I agree with everything he said, to the point of also including the point that we should throw overboard. I think it is a cultural thing. I think it is hard to move. It's a slow tanker moving and turning around. And I think it is turning around, and we know it's going to turn around. It's just the thing I say to the audience members, though, is the earlier you do this, the more impact you will have with your research, the more you will be ahead of the curve, particularly for early career researchers. You can get ahead of the curve, because we do see a trend that more established researchers can often be more resilient to change, because they've grown up in a system that is, this is the way we do it. And so to have, even though the funders say it's good, even though people are using it for career and promotion, they will still be hesitant. So it's a good opportunity for early career researchers to get ahead and to move ahead of the crowd.
Great, love it, Mark. Eric, anything from you for this last question?
Yeah, no, I just, I like to put those what is and isn't of open science in these kinds of talks, because those terms, open science and even open access, get charged in ways that by some stakeholders, not going to name anybody, but put out some information that really just clouds those issues, and still sort of encourages people to hug those traditional models, probably more so than they need to. And to Mark's point, this tanker's moving, the sticks are coming, the funders are speaking, and the more comfortable you get with this now, you will be much better off in the couple of years when this really is moving toward norms in a lot of research communities. So, it's that research whirlpool that you get into, the cycle of your studies. You start building some of these in there, your behaviors are going to be right in the right place for when those expectations are changing. So agree entirely with both Thomas and Mark.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Eric. I'm going to wrap up because I'm mindful of the time, and we've already run over a little bit, but I think we needed to, because we've got a huge number of questions that came in that we couldn't answer. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will be putting the recording out of this webinar alongside the slides, and we will endeavour to answer the questions that we couldn't answer. So look out for those as well online. I just want to thank our three incredible speakers: Eric Olson for the Centre of Open Science, Mark Hahnel from Figshare, and Professor Thomas Heinbockel, who is one of the editors on an InTech Open journal. If you want to know anything more about open science or open access, then I would say get in touch, but do get in touch. Get in touch with the InTech Open team. Look out for their journals and start using preprints. I look forward to seeing you all at the next webinar in June, which is on open data. We already have one speaker lined up from CERN, who's going to be coming to talk to us about open data, and other speakers will be confirmed soon. And I'd like to thank all of you for attending. We've had over 400 of you here, and it's been brilliant to see your questions and your engagement, and your enthusiasm and your desire to sort of step forward and take these first steps to embracing open science. So thank you very much, speakers. Thank you, attendees, and thank you, InTech, and see you all at the next one.